Good Thursday afternoon to you, 4 o'clock time for Sports4CLE. Thanks for joining us. So the NFLPA is due to respond to the NFL, who appealed the 6-game suspension of Deshaun Watson. And then Roger Goodell will announce the designee, and we'll move on. So Mike Florio from Pro Football Talk on the Dan Patrick Show earlier today on how he sees this NFL appeal playing out.
Because the NFL has exercised its right to appeal the decision to the NFL itself, and the NFL still clearly wants to impose a significant punishment on Deshaun Watson, and the game is rigged. I mean, the union agreed to it. This is the bottom line. It doesn't matter who makes the first decision. What matters is who makes the second decision. And Judge Robinson gave the NFL everything it needs from a factual standpoint. Her most important aspect of her decision were her factual findings, because those are binding on appeal. And she found that he did it. She found that he violated the personal conduct policy in 3 different ways. She called it nonviolent sexual assault for victims that had their evidence presented in this process. And now the commissioner can do whatever he wants, or the designee can do whatever he or she wants. And remember this too, Dan, because it really didn't jump off the page. The judge basically found that Deshaun Watson lied. And that is not going to go over well with 345 Park Avenue when you are in a setting like this and you're not telling the truth. This is your chance to come clean and get a lesser punishment. If you don't come clean, the punishment is not going to be reduced.
I think you said that you think the NFL is going to drop the hammer. And this is
I think they are.
Before,
I think he's going to be I think it's going to be full year.
And again, Mike Florio, former lawyer, talking about what he thinks will happen with this NFL appeal. Albert Breer tweets this out. NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell will pick someone outside of the league office to hear the Deshaun Watson appeal, according to Pro Football Talk. Why, in Albert's opinion, gives the NFL a better shot at avoiding court, and it maintains the integrity of the process negotiated with the Players Association. If they cared about either of those, they would have taken the decision of the retired judge that they hired as the independent negotiator. So I respect what Albert's saying, but that illusion is gone. And then again, this one tweeted by Pro Football Talk as part of the text of it. Roger Goodell will not handle the appeal. Mary Jo White, she's employed by the NFL, or Condoleezza Rice could handle the appeal. Now, Condoleezza Rice will be a minority owner of the Broncos, so she's kind of a owner's type of person at this point. I want to throw one more name out there, Jane Skinner, and I want to add her to the list. Before you go Google it, that's Roger Goodell's wife, who was a former Fox News anchor. The arrogance of the NFL never ceases to amaze me. Do they really expect the public to believe that an appointee by Roger Goodell is going to be more unbiased than Judge Sue Robinson, who both the Players Association and the league agreed to hear this? She rendered 6-game decision, and the league doesn't like it. It's like going to a doctor. Eventually, you're going to find somebody that tells you what you're looking to hear, and that's what the NFL is shopping for. They want to hear 10, 12, or a full season. That's what they're looking for, and they'll find a designee that will do that to them. All right, Josina Anderson tweets that her understanding is that the union and Deshaun Watson's counselors have yet to make an official determination to pursue a federal lawsuit. As such, a lawsuit would set aside an improper decision by the appeal officer. Obviously, can't assert an improper decision until a final judgment is made. We are going to head back to Mike Florio, Pro Football Talk, on the Dan Patrick Show. Again, what it would look like and some of the important things to remember should the NFLPA go to federal court to seek that improper decision, the improper justice decision.
Tomorrow is the deadline for the union to submit its paperwork in response to what was submitted yesterday by the league. There's no hearing on appeal. There's no new evidence. The evidence is already done, and it's favorable to the NFL. The CBA and the personal conduct policy require an expedited process, but it doesn't say 3 days, 5 days, whatever, just expedited, like hurry it up. And it makes sense because people need to make plans. The Browns need to make a plan. People need to know what's going on. And there's still that possibility, Dan, of the NFLPA doing what it did for Tom Brady, doing what it did for Ezekiel Elliott, going to court to fight this, and along the way trying to get a temporary injunction aimed at allowing Deshaun Watson to play while this all works out. But if that happens, because a big misconception about this, he won't play week 1 because his 6-game suspension isn't being challenged. Unless the NFLPA decides to challenge that, and they've already said they won't, this is about week 7, not about week 1.
No.
And that's an important distinction. Unless the NFLPA did in fact file to challenge that 6-game suspension, that 6-game suspension stands, and then it's moved up more likely or down by the designee. We have a developing story with the designee. Multiple people are reporting, and Mary Kay Cabot, one of them, that New Jersey Attorney General Peter C. Harvey will be the person that hears the Deshaun Watson appeal. Again, the NFL named the designee. They're trying to give the impression that it is unbiased. They had an unbiased decision in a former federal judge, so we'll see how that ends up. All right, we're going to head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason very quickly. This one just about the whole appeal.
Hi, this is Steve from Atlanta. Wondering how Roger Goodell could possibly rule on the appeal when he has admitted to being a lifelong Steeler fan. Also, the NFL still holds a grudge, I believe, for the greatest fans in football saving their team from moving to Baltimore and giving the NFL a black eye. We messed up their scheme of holding cities hostage for new stadiums and sweetheart deals to owners and made them look pathetic. Ray Lewis was involved in a double murder at the Super Bowl in Atlanta and got no suspension and a minimum fine. Ray Rice was filmed beating a woman and got a 2-game suspension. So now they want to Kaepernick Deshaun. It's just the NFL trying to screw Cleveland again. Thanks, and still go Browns.
And again, we appreciate all the voicemails. Let's welcome in Quincy Carrier. Quincy, I don't know that it's that Roger Goodell is a Steelers fan. That's fine. The problem I have is if you're appealing to the decision maker and you're part of the process, one of the side is appealing to themselves. Man, I like my odds of arguing with myself. I'm going to end up getting what I want.
Yeah, that's the actual conspiracy in this, right? Is that the process has been laid out as such as where the person making the final decision isn't somebody impartial, right? Now, to be fair to the NFL, right, they can say that the main thing that they want to accomplish in that first arbitration thing with Sue Robinson isn't necessarily what the suspension is, right? It's a recommendation. It's not a declaration of suspension, even though if nobody appeals in 3 days, it does become what the suspension is. It's a little bit weird there with whatever the suspension is going to be. But they can say that we're just trying to determine whether this player broke the personal conduct policy or not. And that's what they determined with Sue Robinson that he did. And then we can determine the suspension, I guess. I don't know. This is where if you're the players union, you got to take a hard line in saying that if you appeal, it has to be to another jointly appointed party from both sides here. Now, the NFL is trying to avoid that hardline stance by going with somebody who can seemingly be more impartial, but is also who they're choosing. I mean, this is not become football anymore at this point. Like, this is more similar to the whole 2012 Supreme Court appointee situation than anything. And it's just it's a weird situation. It's legal mumbo jumbo, and I don't even know. This is like trying to follow the salary cap at this point. Like, I have no idea what to tell you guys on what to expect.
And the NFL is doing this for the PR value. Nobody will ever convince me otherwise. All right, Charles Robinson, Yahoo Sports, tweets this out. Roger Goodell specifically does not want Watson playing in Houston in that game. Week 12 lines up with the previously 12-game suspension that they had very limited talks to. Albert Breer also. So that was a couple of people that were reporting that. I'm not quite sure what, I'm sure the Browns would say, fine, Deshaun won't play against the Texans. That's the least of their worries at that point. I don't get that.
Yeah, it seems like the NFL really wants to avoid this Texans game. And look, here's what I'll say. I have no idea what to expect from this suspension length, because what would make sense is that they just go and get what they wanted from the start, right? If this is just going to be the NFL doing whatever they want, then they're just going to go indefinite, make them reapply next offseason, well, in the calendar year. So we're talking, next August he has to apply for reinstatement, which means he's going to get a real shortened offseason program, right? He's not going to be able to participate in May or even OTAs or any of that. Deshaun won't be eligible to come back till next August, and that's just what it will be. But the NFL has a history of making decisions when it comes to suspensions that make nobody happy, right? Like, not the people who are getting suspended are going to be happy about this, and the people who are talking about this player needs to be suspended aren't going to be happy about this. And I just wouldn't be surprised if something like that came down the pipe, right? But that's just me looking kind of cynically at the NFL's office's incompetence in the past in this area, because this is something that we have known in Cleveland, right? We dealt with this with Myles Garrett. We dealt with this with Josh Gordon. Like, if there's a franchise that has dealt with the league office in the word indefinite suspension more than any other fan base, maybe the Patriots, but specifically the Browns. We know how weird, and remember when Josh Gordon got like a whole season and they reduced it to 10 games, 3 games before those 10 games were up. Like, they just do stuff that makes nobody happy, and I just wouldn't take that possibility out of here, that they're going to end up with a suspension here that it's going to ultimately make nobody happy.
Yeah, so the other thing that happened today, Tony Busby, who represents the claimants from Houston against Deshaun Watson in the civil suits, I want to point out, all but one of those has been settled at this point. So he held a press conference with the expressed idea of trying to put some pressure on the NFL to up the suspension. There's without question. I mean, he had some of the claimants were there. They felt like they were not being respected by what the NFL did. I'm not quite sure why they're that concerned about it at this point. They've settled most of their civil lawsuits. Not sure why Busby called this, but he did have a message for the NFL, and here is Tony Busby.
We are here today with a message to the NFL. That message is simple and hopefully clear. Every victim of sexual assault is watching Robert Goodell and the NFL right now. And this idea that Mr. Goodell is going to hand it off to someone else, independent, we don't buy it. Mr. Goodell, what will you do? It's never too late to do the right thing. And that's what these women and those watching are expecting.
All right, again, it's Tony Busby. And yes, he did call him Robert Goodell and then referred to him as Mr. Goodell. You can't do that. If you're going to do a press conference and you're this master PR guy, you got to get the guy's first name right. But I get the message that he's trying to send. I just question why you're getting involved in this at this point.
No, I don't even know. I couldn't even begin to explain the whole circus around this situation. Look, we knew it was going to be a circus when we traded for him. I don't think people were quite in step with the characters involved around this situation, right? Because it's one thing with Deshaun Watson, but the people who are surrounded, it's Rusty Hardin and Tony Busby. And from everything that I've heard from people who follow Texas law, this is like the two wackiest guys in that whole scene going at it. So it's just a weird one. I have no idea. I honestly just want this whole thing to be over with. And I think a lot of Browns fans just want a resolution at this point, right? We have followed and played along with this process since March. We have followed and tried to predict and be responsible with what is in the CBA and all of this to see what the projection is going to be on the team. And now we're in a territory to where anything could happen again. And it's just exhausting. There's going to be a ton of grandstanding here on both sides of this because remember, Deshaun Watson is at this point still maintaining his innocence against all of these charges, whether you believe him to be innocent or not. So it's a circus. It's a complete circus here. And, it's as easy to tune things out, but I don't know what Tony Busby's going for right there. I don't think that was successful in achieving anything that he wanted to achieve there, right? I think he just kind of looked like a goof right there.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. All right, Quincy, Carrier, and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. We'll head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. We'll also hear what a former NFL player thinks Brown's roster looks like. Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
The Greater Cleveland Sports Hall of Fame celebrates the star athletes and notable sports figures who were born or have made their home in Greater Cleveland. It tells the story of discipline, commitment, perseverance, sportsmanship, and excellence in achievement. It encourages and inspires those who believe in sport and its direct impact on the well-being of our community. Go to clevelandsportshall.com or follow us on Twitter at GCLE Sports HOF for more details.
Quincy, Carrier, and I continue talking Browns. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. This one again about the NFL's decision to appeal the Deshaun Watson suspension.
Hi, guys. Regarding the Watson suspension, do you really think it was public opinion or more outcry from the national media that influenced the NFL and Roger Goodell? Secondary, I loved the show yesterday. Your media experts were spot on. Your first one stated there'd have to be a different game plan with Jacoby Brissett. I can see that. He said the defense would have to create more turnovers. Good point. First 4 games, you got mediocre quarterbacks. Best way to do that is stop the run and make them put it in the air. So I think a nose tackle becomes more important. Also, to put the cherry on top of those Sundays, you got the Patriots coming into town week 6, and they ran the ball down our throats last year. And they drafted a guard with their first-round pick, so I don't see any reason for them to change their modus operandi. Your opinions, please. Thank you.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. Quincy, I think public opinion and the outcry from the national media are one and the same. The NFL was kind of taking the temperature of the 6-game suspension. Most people outside of Cleveland felt it was too light, so they decided they were going to up it.
Yeah, and honestly, I think, they were, once that came out 6 games, there was language in that contract that Sue Robinson, right, in the CBA, that Sue Robinson pointed out as to why she could not go more than 6 games, which is based off precedent and based off of what you have before. And since you don't have specific language in there for anything harsher than 6 games, this is what I'm going to give. So they were put in a corner where Sue Robinson's hands were tied, in her opinion, on what she could give because of the language in the CBA. So they had to address that. The question was, would they address it in the offseason and use Sue Robinson's ruling as a way to say, hey, look, this is what she said? Or would they do that, take the opportunity there to change the language, which is pretty much what they're attempting to do based off of action. But yeah, that was the main issue in that. Again, it's a tricky situation. It's a hard one to try to figure out where the league or why the league did it. I don't necessarily think it was 100% public outcry. I mean, like, that's always going to have a massive factor in what the league is going to decide here. But also, I think, just if you were arguing for a year and somebody said 6 games, it's probably going to be a hard pill for you to swallow, right? If you were on the other side of that argument. So I think that also has to do with it, right? That they wanted more than 6 games, well, more like a whole season, and they ended up with not even half of a season. That probably factored into it a greater deal than what people are assuming here with the public outcry. Because honestly, I know people were mad on TV and Twitter, but like, in this day and age, when the heat is really hot. The heat wasn't that hot on the NFL after that day. Like, people were mad. They did their morning shows, but the next day the other news dropped and less people were talking about it. So it wasn't like the heat was so hot on them that they had to do something. It was more or less kind of we lost this argument really bad to Sue Robinson, and we're going to try to win this argument one way or the other.
All right, so Chris Canty, former player on ESPN's Get Up, on just the whole Browns. Can they overcome the adversity, and what will this season look like for them?
Well, I think they can, G. And for context, I was in that Baltimore Ravens locker room in 2014 when Ray Rice happened, and that was one of those situations that made us closer in that locker room, and we took an us against the world mentality just because of all of the controversy that was swirling around the team. Now, I get it. Deshaun Watson is a quarterback. Ray Rice was a running back. It's different in terms of the impact on winning. But when you start to think about how that can galvanize a team, I think this could be something where the Cleveland Browns use it as fuel in order for them to try to be a competitive team and have a successful season.
Quincy, it's an interesting take from Chris Canty, who, as he mentioned, experienced it with Ray Rice.
Yeah, I mean, there's some truth to that. And if you don't even have to be a former NFL player to understand that. Like, we've all been in situations to where where things aren't what you want them to be, and they're a bit hectic, but you do like the people that you work with enough that you can kind of rally around with that. I've been in a situation like that before. Like, and this kind of stress does bring that. And also, let's not factor out, like, Kevin Stefanski, he's a pretty unflappable dude there, right? Like, from day one of this whole process to right now, through all the ups and downs, he's been the same exact guy. He has not shown one difference of emotional change in there. And when you have a leader like that running the team, that's the kind of mindset that's going to run through the locker room. And it's reflected. Like, as much as everybody's head's been on fire about this situation outside of Berea, it has not felt like that when you talk to these players in the building, right? They're just like, yeah, man, we'll figure this out whenever it happens, see what happens, and then, figure that out once that's done. Like, they're just going day by day with this. So it tells me that, nobody's really freaking out about this within the building. So I think they're just all focused on the upcoming season. If it's Jacoby, they'll roll with Jacoby. If it's Deshaun for X amount of games, obviously they're ready to roll with that. But, they're just going to take this one day by day here.
So I know you've addressed this on your show, and Quincy has his own show. Google it, Quincy Carrier on YouTube. Do you think Kevin Stefanski's play calling improves this year?
Well, it was easy to say this when I knew how many games Deshaun Watson was going to play, right? But, yeah, depending on how many games Deshaun Watson plays, it's going to be better. And I think even with Jacoby Brissett, it's going to look much, much better just because you're not going to be fighting your quarterback on the decision-making, right? Like, you will tell Jacoby, this is what I want you to do. Jacoby's going to go ahead and do that. With Baker, there was, hey, I want you to do this. But Baker's like, I want to do this. And then there was that friction there. And whenever you have that friction, no matter how talented the quarterback, between coach, play caller, and quarterback, it's happened with Aaron Rodgers and Mike McCarthy in the past, right? It's going to look like a mess because that's not how an offense should function, right? Either you have complete trust in your quarterback's ability to see the field and you go with that, or you have complete trust in your coach to be able to make those decisions for you. But it can't be both. Right. And that's going to make the play calling be better because it's actually going to be executed properly, or at least closer to properly than it was last year, which was the entire problem. the play calls weren't bad. The Browns had the highest percentage of open receivers on a given play last year, according to Pro Football Focus, or at least in the top 5 of that stat. The play calling, it tells you the play calling wasn't bad. The execution was. Why was the execution bad? Clearly, there was an injury on Baker Mayfield's part, but also there was that friction between what the coach wanted to do and what the player wanted to achieve. If those two things are in line, you'll see much better play calling. It's why the play calling didn't look bad when Case Keenum or Garrett Gilbert was out there. Not because they're better quarterbacks than Baker Mayfield, but because, they were more in line with what the offense wanted, what the head coach and the offensive coordinator wanted.
Quincy Kier and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we'll head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. We'll talk a little bit about the defense. Sports for CLE will be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students, kindergarten through 12th grade, can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
The Greater Cleveland Sports Hall of Fame celebrates the star athletes and notable sports figures who were born or have made their home in Greater Cleveland. It tells the story of discipline, commitment, perseverance, sportsmanship, and excellence in achievement. It encourages and inspires those who believe in sport and its direct impact on the well-being of our community. Go to clevelandsportshall.com or follow us on Twitter at GCLE Sports HOF for more details.
We continue talking Browns with Quincy Kier. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason with a question about the Deshaun Watson suspension.
Hey, go Browns. I'm a long-time listener. Love the show. I love the way you guys talk about the Browns. I guess my only question is, if they appeal this and they up his suspension for Watson, and then the Browns or the NFLPA guys, if they decide to, sue and take this to federal court, so what happens if Watson and his team win in federal court? Does his suspension just go back to 6 games and that's it, or does he get no games? I don't understand how that works. If he was to take it to federal court and he wins, do they just go back to the 6 games, or does it get wiped out? Just want to hear what you guys think. Go Browns! Boo, boo, boo.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. So the way it works, we heard that the NFLPA was not going to appeal the suspension, which means they're accepting the 6-game suspension. If in fact they did not appeal that before the deadline, which we haven't heard that they did, doesn't mean that they couldn't have done that. It would be 6 games. So any type of going to court, even to seek an injunction or a temporary restraining order, that would be for week 7 of the season, that Deshaun Watson would sit out the first 6 games, and it would give him more time in court. Let's take a look at this. Must-see rookies in the preseason. This is according to CBSSports.com. They go Alex Wright for Browns edge rusher. Wright, 6'5", 271 at the NFL Combine. Chris Kiffin comes from San Francisco. A history of developing defensive line talent, and Wright has the ability to learn from Garrett and Clowney, 2 former #1 overall picks. Quincy, when you look at that, how excited are you to see what Alex Wright develops into?
I'm interested to see what Alex Wright develops into, right? Good size. I didn't love his tape coming out, but that's because there just wasn't a lot of it, right? Coming out of University of Alabama, Birmingham available. So, I'm still intrigued to see how he makes that adjustment coming to the NFL. But he's certainly an intriguing prospect, one that a lot of people like a lot. But yeah, it's going to be, and also seeing how he can do that inside-out versatility, and if he could be a long-term Clowney replacement there on the opposite end of Myles Garrett is going to be a huge factor for the next coming years, because, whether Deshaun Watson is suspended this year, his contract's going to be on the books next year. So you're going to want to be able to save some money by having players who are a little bit cheaper under the cap.
All right. I know you also have addressed this topic on your show. Browns defense against mobile quarterbacks. You concerned? What are your thoughts? What is that going to look like this year?
Yeah, so when you have JOK and you have some athletic DBs, it's a little bit better, right? And that's what we saw last year versus Lamar Jackson it was better because you had athleticism on the edges. But one of the interesting things that I've noticed with this team over the last few years since Andrew Berry has been picking the players is they have been weak in the interior. And where that has cost them is, remember the Chad Henne run, right? Where it just opened up in the middle because you don't have great defensive tackle play and you're going to allow some scramble lanes like that. That's the big problem that they have there, right? The solution to that problem is we have enough DBs in the back end of this to where we can keep a linebacker hovering in those situations closer to the line of scrimmage so things don't go out of whack. But if you are not elite in coverage in that way, then that's going to open up, right? So that's the gamble that the Browns are taking with how they have this roster structured. And it could, continue to be a problem because it would require the secondary to be working at almost a top 10 level. And while I do think highly of this secondary, it's hard to predict the secondary just jump to that level when they haven't been in the past.
So this is according to Pro Football Focus, intriguing players to know for training camp. The Browns, they say Grant Delpit, they kind of lean on the last 5 games, a strong PFF grade, 75.8. Can play deep safety, close to the line. And he really did show signs of being the kind of guy they thought when they traded up to get him in the second round of the draft. Of course, coming off the Achilles injury. What do you think? What can we expect from Grant Delpit? Maybe that's the best way to ask that.
I'm fully interested to figure out what we can expect from Grant Delpit because, again, this was a fantastic prospect coming out of LSU before that ankle injury that he had, right? This all kind of started with the ankle injury his last year at LSU, and it kind of trickled into this Achilles situation. And he's not been the same. But if you go back before he had those injuries to 2018, he was not just the best defensive player in the country at the safety position. I mean, it's hard when you have had a predecessor like Jamal Adams at LSU, and people aren't comparing you to Jamal Adams, the guy that was great before you, or even Tyrann Mathieu. They're jumping all the way to Ed Reed because you played so well at such an early age. That's how good Grant Delpit was before this injury. If he can get anywhere close to that, and JOK can develop like we expect him to, fully expect him to, then the stuff that I'm worried about in interior might not be a problem, right? Because you might just be so dominant in the back end that it does not matter as much what's going on in the front. But Grant Delpit is the key to that, right? Because if you then don't have that version of a player, right, with Grant Delpit, you also don't have a super athletic, rangy safety that you feel comfortable giving a lot of space to, right? You have John Johnson, he's not super athletic. You have Ronnie Harrison. We've seen what happens when you give him more space to operate in. It's not necessarily good. If you want to see proof of that, go watch the Chargers game from last year, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. But if Grant can handle getting that much space, then that frees up a lot of DBs to be closer to the line of scrimmage, or at least closer to that area where quarterbacks would scramble or in the flat, and then you could just smother teams like that. But that will require Grant Delpit being, the guy that we saw in 2018. Don't know if that's in him in the NFL level, but if it is, then, we might be able to make the playoffs, maybe even go to the second round, third round, fourth. Who knows with Jacoby Brissett? Jacoby Brissett might have the year of his life if the defense has a Grant Delpit playing up to his potential, because that's the thing that puts this whole thing over the top on the defensive end of the ball.
Quincy Carrier and I can step aside, take one more time out. We'll head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason and talk a little bit about the Browns O-line. Sports4CLE will be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to OhioLottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
The Greater Cleveland Sports Hall of Fame celebrates the star athletes and notable sports figures who were born or have made their home in Greater Cleveland. It tells the story of discipline, commitment, perseverance, sportsmanship, and excellence in achievement. It encourages and inspires those who believe in sport and its direct impact on the well-being of our community. Go to clevelandsportshall.com or follow us on Twitter at GCLE Sports HOF for more details.
We continue talking Browns with Quincy Carrier. Time to head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. This one about the whole Browns organization.
Dave, adversity. What better team than the Cleveland Browns and the Cleveland fan base knows what the word is and means. But starting today, all of Browns Nation must use adversity not as a crutch as we have in the past, but as a platform to greatness. Earlier, I had stated Coach Stefanski was on the hot seat. I would like to change that statement to all Browns Nation, organization, team, coaching staff, Browns fan base. We all are on the hot seat. Facts are, on paper, we have one of the best rosters in the NFL. Adversity in life has created unexpected leaders, have created players to become superstars. If we block out all the talk on the outside and concentrate only on team, all we need starting on game one is 1 point more than our opponent. Victories add up to confidence, and confidence add up to the dominance that we can tackle any adversity in front of us. The new feeling of confidence and dominance needs to start today for all of Browns Nation.
As always, appreciate all of the voicemails. Quincy, as far as hot seat, it is a you better win league. That's if you don't win, guys don't have their jobs very long.
That's true. That's true. By the way, shout out to that caller, man. I thought he was giving the speech for Independence Day. I was ready to go fight some aliens with Will Smith after doing that. But yeah, it's hard to put Kevin Stefanski on the hot seat if Deshaun Watson gets a super serious suspension here. How are you going to evaluate that, right? Are you really going to evaluate Kevin Stefanski off of 1 year where Baker Mayfield had no arm and couldn't throw and was terrible, 27th ranked QBR for whatever reason, and then another year where Jacoby Brissett's the quarterback, and even then he probably will post up better records than what most of the other 100 coaches have in Cleveland since '99. So yeah, I just don't see a scenario in which he's on the hot seat. Again, the hot seat and that kind of stuff only rises with expectations, right? With Deshaun Watson out there, the expectations are high. 6-game suspension, high expectation, higher chance to be on the hot seat if you don't reach those expectations. With Jacoby Brissett, people are already saying we're punting the season. So, I mean, if you go 500, people are going to – it's like when Pittsburgh didn't have Ben for the whole year that 1 year. They went 500. They wanted to put Mike Tomlin in the Hall of Fame for that. The expectation really does affect how people perceive the year they've gone.
Yeah. All right, and again, I know you've talked about this on your show. Again, Quincy's own show on YouTube. You can Google it. Browns offensive line, is it still elite?
I think so. I think they're not the best anymore, right? They used to just be flat out the best by a significant margin. Other teams have caught up, but they are really good. Now, here's what could make them the best again. What if Nick Harris is better than J.C. Tretter, right? That's what they're kind of betting on, right? That he's better. What if if Jedrick Wills takes that step from second to third that Wyatt Teller did, where Wyatt was a serviceable guard and then all of a sudden became the best guard in football or the best young guard in football next to Joe Bitonio? Okay, boom. You have the best offensive line in football by a significant margin. But if we're just projecting based on what players did in the years previous with those two young guys, then you have a pretty good offensive line. Also, we got to figure out the health of Jack Conklin. Came back from that pec injury way earlier than anybody expected him to, but Jack Conklin's ability to come back from injury has not been as big as an issue as him being injured, right? So we have to see what his status is there. And is James Hudson ready to take that role, right? If the Browns could sustain multiple hits on that offensive line and still maintain an elite level of play, that's a huge win for them.
How important is that going to be, especially if it's Jacoby Brissett as the quarterback? I mean, do you rely even more on the run game? And I mean, Jacoby Brissett's athletic. You can do some things with him game plan-wise and as a quarterback. How important is the line if it is Jacoby Brissett?
it becomes the most important thing on the team, right? That's what it transitions to. Everything's going to be on the offensive line. When Deshaun Watson's in there, everything would go through Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson's going to be the most important player on the offensive side of the ball. That would be who would be most important. If he's not in there, it becomes the offensive line, because you're going to be able to run off the strength of the offensive line, and given the play action heavy schemes that the Browns like to run, you're going to be able to throw off of whatever the offensive line allows to develop, right? Again, you don't necessarily have the greatest wide receivers in the world, but you know what helps not great wide receiving play? Good offensive lines, because if you give a wide receiver 3 seconds to get open, they will get open given all the rules in the favor of the offensive side of the ball. So that's really what they're up against there.
Quincy Carrier, as always, great stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much, Quincy.
No problem. You have a great day.
All right, Quincy Carrier, make sure you watch his show. Google it. He is on YouTube. Good stuff. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, Brad Ward will join us. He's from Browns Wire, All Eyes on Cleveland podcast. Should the Browns be looking at Jimmy Garoppolo? We'll talk about it. Sports4CLE, be right back.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to OhioLottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
I am powerful beyond my wildest imagination.
I will define my future.
I will keep challenging myself to improve.
Because I am a future leader of this great nation.
I will be responsible for raising a beautiful family.
And educating not only my generation, but many more to come.
I will make a difference in my community.
And I will stand up for what I believe in.
I will not settle for simply chasing my dreams. I will achieve them.
Because I was given a chance.
An opportunity.
A home.
At Family, Career, and Community Leaders of America.
The ultimate leadership experience.
FCCLA has been one of the greatest experiences of my life.
It's made me who I am today.
Join us. We'll build a new future together.
We continue talking Browns here on Sports4CLE. Time for us to head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. This one about the Deshaun Watson trade.
Hey guys, I had a question out of Knoxville, Tennessee. I was just wondering why the NFL approved the Deshaun Watson trade if they were going to enforce a stricter suspension policy. Don't all trades have to go through some type of approval by the NFL? And if he was an ineligible player or a player who is not going to be allowed on the field, why would they approve a trade? Thanks.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. Let's welcome in Brad Ward, BrownsWire.com, host of the All Eyes on Cleveland podcast. Brad, the only reason they would not allow a trade would be, health. You fail a physical. Basically, they didn't know what the suspension was going to be when the Browns made the trade. If you remember back then, he had been cleared of any criminal charges, and as they did the discovery, and the league isn't going to disallow a trade for that reason. It's basically teams, it's a buyer beware. If you're trading for him, he might not be there.
Yeah, the Browns knew that this was in the range of outcomes. The suspension, all teams did when they traded for him. It was his case was yet to be applied to the code of conduct or litigated in front of, Judge Sue L. Robinson and gone through this new process. So none of that had happened yet, so they couldn't hold up the trade. They didn't know if he would be even suspended at all until now, right? So there's no way to block a trade based on that future outcomes, right, or potential future outcomes. There's a risk the Browns knew they were taking.
Yeah, and again, they're looking at it from an organizational standpoint. It's a 10-year deal, not just a 1-year deal. It's looking like it might be painful the first year, the way the cards are falling right now. All right, so the question before Rob Ninkovich, should the Browns be interested in trading for Jimmy Garoppolo? And keep in mind, Rob Ninkovich played with both Jimmy Garoppolo and Jacoby Brissett.
Of course, and I've played with Jacoby. I played with Jimmy G. They're on the team at the same time I was, so I understand both of those guys are great football players. But Jimmy G, obviously, with the experience that he has in high-pressure situations, he's been on a great football team. The Browns don't want to have a lost season here, and if you're on that team and you're not the quarterback, you don't want to have a lost season either. You want to compete. You want to put yourself in the position to win a division, to get in the playoffs. If you look at the roster, they are loaded. They've been loaded. So now what are they going to do at the quarterback position? I don't know, but I think Jimmy G being available, that seems like the best option.
Brad, I'm not sure that the Browns are of that mindset. I think they probably revisit it if the suspension is increased significantly. Maybe where I want to go with this, do you think there's a tipping point? And if so, how many games do you think they look and say, yeah, we might look at a Jimmy Garoppolo?
I mean, selfishly, Dave, I wish they would look at him if it was 10 or more or whatever. But financially, it really only makes sense if it's a year, right? I feel like it has to be a year. And I think if it was a year, and it may end up being a year at this point, that they need to revisit who your quarterback is for all of 2022. So at least check his health, at least see what, if he gets cut, maybe you can get him on the cheap. But either way, with his contract, with Deshaun Watson's contract tolling, if he gets a year suspension, it certainly makes their money situation more flexible moving forward. And they would be able to maybe take on some of that money of his existing contract, that is Jimmy Garoppolo I'm talking about, and bring him in, who I think is a better option than Jacoby Brissett. No, Jacoby Brissett respected. I think he can win some games for the Browns, but Garoppolo is just more seasoned, knows this offense better, has won in this offense. And if you give him the weapons, and maybe not so much the weapons, but the talented team around him, that I think that they would be better off with Garoppolo. But I think it has to be a year for the Browns to honestly look at it. I would love them to look at it if it was like 10, 12, whatever. But I think it needs to be a year for the Browns to really take a serious look, Dave.
And the important thing to remember about Jimmy Garoppolo, he went to a Super Bowl. He's made deep playoff runs. So he has won the type of games that the Browns want to be in and win.
Yeah, absolutely. He's been there. He's taken teams there with really good running games, using tight ends, using everything that the Browns have. I mean, it's a very, very similar system. Great run game out in San Francisco, great run game here in Cleveland. Hopefully a good defense this year. I think they'll gel and come together. So all the parts around him to be that game manager type that can make big plays when he needs to, which he did in a few of those deep playoff runs. So I think he gets them further than Brissett would, for sure.
All right, this is from the 33rdteam.com. Those are former NFL executives. They're ranking the 2022 defenses. They have the Bengals defense ranked number 1, Bills number 2, Packers check in at number 3, the Browns all the way down at number 19. The question that they have, are the Browns good enough inside with Jordan Elliott, Taven Bryan, a previous bust, they note, and Perrion Winfrey? I think that's awfully low. I think you can point to any defensive units and say, hey, the defensive tackles are weak. I think you're minimizing. You got 2 former number 1 picks on the outside, And that secondary is pretty darn good, and you got some young linebackers that can run. 19 is awfully low.
It's very low. I would put the Browns at least in the top 10 defensively before this year. Now, they're pointing to interior defensive line, but let's be real. Interior defensive line is not a significant position in today's NFL defenses. Let's just be real about it. A lot of teams want to use that position to get to the quarterback more than they even care about stopping the run at this point, because they want to invite teams to run. So I think the Browns will patchwork together a fine group in there, but they're fantastic off the edge. They have a great secondary. AJ Green has been playing great out at camp, a guy that I loved last year. I think is kind of coming into a role this year. Going to push Greedy maybe for that third cornerback role, in my opinion, as well as MJ Emerson has gotten great, reports back from camp. So that secondary looks great. The safeties look great. Everything but really that interior defensive line on defense. And there are guys there that could step up, but when they're playing inside of Garrett and Clowney, I think it kind of dulls maybe how bad they are on paper when we see it on the field. We'll have to see, but I think knocking them down to 19 is a little bit absurd in my opinion.
Yeah, I would agree with you, and they're going to get a lot of single blocking, the guys interior, because you're not going to try to. You aren't single blocking Myles Garrett, and you're probably going to pick your poison when you decide to single block Jadeveon Clowney. Brad Ward and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, 3 potential guys that could be big contributors nobody saw coming. We'll also take a look at Taven Bryan. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine.
The Greater Cleveland Sports Hall of Fame celebrates the star athletes and notable sports figures who were born or have made their home in Greater Cleveland. It tells the story of discipline, commitment, perseverance, sportsmanship, and excellence in achievement. It encourages and inspires those who believe in sport and its direct impact on the well-being of our community. Go to clevelandsportshall.com or follow us on Twitter at GCLE Sports HOF for more details.
We continue talking Browns with Brad Ward from BrownsWire.com, as well as the host of the All Eyes on Cleveland podcast. 3 potential contributors nobody saw coming. This is from Dog Pound Daily. Number 3, Richard LeCounte, 5th-round pick, 2021. He flashed a little bit last year and then kind of fell off a little bit. Number 2, one of the guys they signed that we've talked a little bit about, Taven Bryan, defensive tackle, former first-round pick of the Jacksonville Jaguars. And number 1, a guy who has been pretty good early in camp, Michael Woods. So, Brad, let's talk a little bit about those 3. Who do you like? What do you like about those guys?
I've always liked Richie LeCounte a lot. I liked it when they drafted him. He did pretty well. Like you said, he did okay in spot duty last year. He made some mistakes, but I like him at depth at the safety position. Maybe he gets in that rotation of Joe Woods' 3 safety looks. Maybe he can get involved in that a little bit. But I like Richie LeCounte a lot, and I hope that he continues to play well at camp. Taven Bryan, it's hard to tell, right? They just put the pads on, right? It's really hard to tell until they really get going, until we see with the pads on. But you hope, he has that Andrew Berry first-round draft pick pedigree, right? He has the ability, the quickness, the athleticism, all of that. So you hope that he was just being used improperly in Jacksonville. He's got a lot of NFL playtime experience. I think he played in 16 games, 3 years in a row for them. Not terrific play, but maybe he just was in, wrong place, new position, new situation, and maybe he flashes. But the best one of the three, in the position they needed the most, to be honest, is Michael Woods, right? So him coming on is a huge thing for the Browns. They need him to play well. They need him to make the team and be a contributor. I mean, we talked about, at least I banged the table about how thin this room was, how unproven this room was. And we've got Cooper dinged, Bell dinged, and Schwartz dinged already in camp. It's not ideal. So Michael Woods, getting reps and showing that he can be a contributor. Now, he didn't play at all in minicamp or whatever, so this is the first time they're really getting a good look at him in their scheme and whatnot. So I think that he has kind of highlighted a lot of days out there, at least the things that I've heard from people. So good stuff there. They need an extra contributor in that room badly.
Yeah, I would agree wholeheartedly. Those are the two of the three positions that you're concerned about. Bryan at tackle and Woods at wide receiver. Bryan's an interesting one, and you kind of alluded to it. Former first-round pick of the Jacksonville Jaguars, hasn't put it together in the NFL yet. This is a look at his scouting report coming out, just to give you an idea of what they were saying about him. Talented defender, raw athletic ability and play traits, lack of production due to a lack of instincts and feel for the position. Was in a developmental phase as far as a prospect goes. And then you look at his strengths, some of the things that he does well as part of this. Athletically gifted, loose lower body, flexibility, agility to play defensive end, big upfield burst on the ball, gets skinny, slithers through, flashes disruptive potential that's waiting to be fully cultivated, and he's extremely tough and determined. And again, when you have those type of strengths, and that's done by an independent guy, that wasn't somebody that was before he was drafted, you see what Andrew Berry and the Browns are thinking. Can we unlock him? Maybe Jacksonville is asking him to do some things that he couldn't do. Let's put him in a different system, ask him to do things that he can do. A guy that comes to mind, Tech McKinley from last year, the Browns were on the verge of unlocking that potential again, and he got, he had the Achilles injury.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The thing about him is, that jumps out in the scouting reports is, right, I think I read another one where it's he's a one-gap penetrator, and he lacks that natural instincts, right? But he has all the athleticism in the world. So really what that's saying, read between the lines, is put him in a position where he doesn't have to think too much and he can just go be an athlete, right? So maybe Jacksonville wasn't using him properly. He's got great strength. He's got great speed once he gets off of a tackle to run down a running back, to run down a quarterback. So use those assets the best you can. So, you got to trust in Joe Woods and their interior defensive line coaches to get him in a position where it's not up here and he can just go physically, right? Just go be a physical specimen. Just go be fast. Go slither through those one-gap penetrators and make tackles in the backfield. Be a disruptor, but not have to, think too much. So, let him focus on one thing that he does really well, because that room, as we kind of talked about before, I think the best way to approach that room is find guys that can fill roles, right? Guys that can be in on rundowns, guys that can be in on pass downs, guys that can, plug, a 3rd and 3 play that you're expecting, a run, and you put, Sheldon Day in there, maybe on a 3rd and 9, it's Taven Bryan, and he can get after the quarterback or get after a screenplay and run somebody down in the flat. You've got to fill this room with lots of bodies and different role players because you don't have one stud. So make it easy for him. Give him a one-track, where he doesn't have to depend on a lot of instincts and all that, and just let his athleticism take over. I think that's the best way to use a guy like him. with his pedigree. And I think they'll find a way to use him effectively. I mean, they've done that in the past, as you mentioned, with Tack McKinley, Malik McDowell, another guy that did really well last year. They gave him the ability to get up there and disrupt. Unfortunately, he got in trouble again, but, for the last year, he was very productive for them on the interior defensive line.
Brad Ward, BrownsWire.com, as well as the host of All Eyes on Cleveland podcast. Brad, as always, good stuff. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Dave. I appreciate it always, man.
Have a good one.
You too.
All right, Brad Ward, make sure you catch him, host of the All Eyes on Cleveland podcast. That's going to do it for this edition of Sports for CLE. See you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4.